I'm sorry. I had planned a very uh, quiet breakfast, shower, and whatnot, but I didn't answer the wake-up call. And they didn't come up to the room to see if I had died in the night until about 20 minutes ago. Normally, I need 2 hours and four alkaloids to wake up fully. I sleep very deeply. I've only had three of my four alkaloids. Uh, None of them are tryptamines, by the way. Um, so uh, I'm going to speak about snuff tryptamines. Uh, I had thought that part of this, uh, after writing ayahuasca analogs, I had said that the snuff business had been overlooked. The theory of Homestead and Lindgren, which is called the ayahuasca theory, is really the snuff theory. That is, that the harmine from Banisteriopsis can catalyze the oral activity of tryptamines, DMT in this case, in ayahuasca, because it is known to be inactive orally up to a dose of about a gram. But among the tryptamines, that is the exception, not the rule. All the other tryptamines are active orally. In TCAL, there are 39 psychoactive tryptamines cited, of which DMT is the only one that is not active orally. One other has not been tested orally. In the children's book, they say that bufotenine and 5-methoxy-DMT or the O-methyl bufotenine are inactive, but that was premature. They are not. And so after, in the late 90s, this is now 25 years ago for me, I decided to do the same thing I did with ayahuasca analogs and model not just the snuffs, but all of the various shamanic preparations involving bufotenine and 5-methoxy-DMT. DMT is not involved in the snuffs today. It may once have been, but that's a detail I won't have time to go into. The important tryptamines in the shamanic snuffs are bufotenine and 5-methoxy-DMT. Tryptamine means indole ethylamine. It's the indole ring with two carbons and a nitrogen on it. And the indole ring, if you take the mescaline molecule, which is a phenyl, the 6-carbon ring, ethylamine, and cyclize it around, that gives you indole. So indole is phenethylamine, phenethylamine, ethylamine. And then if you add another ethylamine side chain, ethylamine is 2 carbons and a nitrogen, you get tryptamine. The basic tryptamine is serotonin. Which has the 5-hydroxy group and OH group. So 5-hydroxytryptamine is serotonin, it is called that because it's important. There are many receptors in the circulatory system, serotonin toning the blood, and it was only much later discovered to be important in the brain. And so serotonin if you add the diet, just as with basic tryptamine, it's not active as a visionary drug. But with the two methyl groups, which is carbon and 3 hydrogens, dimethyltryptamine, DMT, then it becomes very active. So if you take dimethyl serotonin, that is 5-hydroxytryptamine, and add that the dimethyl, you get dimethyl serotonin, and that is bufotenine. And bufotenine was first taken out of the skin secretions of toads in the 1920s. And it wasn't until 1955 that it was discovered to be also a plant product in the genus Anadenanthera, of which there are only 2 species with 2 varieties each. They're all active. They're all used in shamanism. And in the immature seeds, actually DMT was first found as a natural product at the same time in those seeds, but it only occurs in the immature seeds and pods. Only the mature seeds are used to make the snuff. They're simply somewhat dried, ground as well as possible, mixed with some kind of lime or ashes, and then snuff. And that is called nyopo. And it was documented by Richard Spruce in the 1850s. So it's been known for a long time. But no one it had occurred to no one to do the human experiments with it. And the theory of Homestead and Lindgren, this synergy between harming, because the snuffs also contain Banisteriopsis. So that this theory it was later extrapolated to ayahuasca, but they proposed it that they just assumed that these would not be active in the nose because they assumed they would be like DMT, not active orally, and that had been discovered in Europe in 1956 by Stephen Zara, who was the first one to discover the psychoactivity of DMT, but he was only by injection, and everyone assumed that DMT was inactive orally. If you take enough, it will eventually be active, but up to a gram, it is not active orally. So they proposed this synergy. It was accepted, it was extrapolated to ayahuasca, but never tested in human beings until I did it myself with a series of about 30 bioassays, which are reported in ayahuasca animals. So the second step was to do the same thing with the snuffs. So the Anadenanthera snuffs were known since the time of the first contact, almost. The Columbus's people didn't mention it, but it was very early on, at least by the end of the 1700s. It was mentioned historically as nyopo, sometimes yopo. In the Antilles, it was called kooba by the but I'm sorry, that was wrong. One of Colon's men was abandoned on the islands to learn the Taino language, and he wrote about Kooba, which is Anadenanthera snuff, Anadenanthera peregrina, variety peregrina. Anyway, we're more interested in the chemistry and pharmacology. I don't have enough time to go into the details. So I modeled the two types of snuffs. Everyone thought all this historical snuff reports referred to Kooba, which is also called Nyopo and Yopo and Parika. It has many names. Nyopo is the one that I use that most distinguishes it. Uh, and then it wasn't until 1954 that Richard Evans Schulte discovered a second type of snuff in the Tucano region, which is the southernmost Colombia. And this is the archaic region of shamanism in South America. That's where Yahe, or they call it Kaapi, comes from. And it spread out from there. That's where the use of cacao, coca, and the Anadenanthera snuff would have been from a little bit farther north. It's not from that region, but this is the birthing ground of the South American shamanic complex. So he found two snuffs called Yati and Yato, and they were not made from seeds. The Anadenanthera snuffs are always made from seeds. They were made from the bark of a tree, of a jungle tree, and Anadenanthera is a savanna tree. It doesn't grow in the Amazon. It has been planted there, but it grows all around the Amazon completely. And it's very common. But the genus of Yato and Yaki was virola in the Myristicaceae, which is the nutmeg family. And so Schulte's documented very carefully. They strip the bark, and then they pound the bark. They process it various ways, but they get a red resin out of the bark, which they dry and powder and snuff. And they use a blowgun method of snuffing. One person blows it with a short tube into the nostrils of another, and they also also use it as dart poison. And so it's very much related to their hunting technology. They use it as dart poison, and some of the groups only coat the darts, which are little slivers of bamboo, on this resin, and then when they need to snuff, they scrape it off the darts. But others collect specifically the resin for the snuff. Uh, so these were studied chemically in the 1960s. There's a great deal of chemistry on bufotenine. There's very little on the virola. The virola is the genus. So the bufotenine comes from Anadenanthera. 5-methoxy-DMT turned out to be the key tryptamine in virola snuffs. And so I modeled all of these with about 40 bioassays at the end of the 90s, not both a series of bufotenine bioassays, which involved intranasal, sublingual, because sometimes they're put in the mouth, oral, and also intrarectal, and they smoked them also. So I isolated this from Anadenanthera seeds that I collected in Argentina. I isolated pure bufotenine, and I showed that it was active by all these routes. I also vaporized it and inhaled the vapor, just as some people quote unquote smoke DMT. It's not really smoking because there's no smoke. It's inhaling the vapor. And I reported the activity by all these routes, both of that was with bufotenine, with 5-methoxy DMT. I didn't bother with the vaporizing because that was already well known, but I also did the intranasal, the sublingual, and oral, but that was not known to be used as an enema, so I didn't use that intrarectally. I reported all these data in a book called Shamanic Snuffs, or Entheogenic Orines, of which I only printed 1,000 copies, leather bound. And I decided it's a specialized topic. It's very detailed, and rather, for ecological reasons, rather than print 5,000 copies at $20 a piece, I'll print 1,000 at $100 a piece. And it's not because I wanted to keep people from getting the information, because I published it in the scientific literature as well, in Journal of Psychoactive Drugs, in a paper called Pharmacology, Psychonautic Bioassays, etc. So it is available. And I am going to reprint the second edition of Ayahuasca Analogs with the snuff book in an even more expensive edition. But then I'm going to make it as an ebook, so it will really be available for £10 or so. So it turned out that both bufotenine and 5-methoxy DMT were orally active and quite orally active. I don't have time to go through details, but I will just summarize it. Everyone thought, and indeed a couple of years before I published this, in the same journal of psychoactive drugs, Tom Lytle and Jochen Gartz, a European who's now deceased, who's written many good books. He's a chemist, was a chemist, many good books on the visionary mushrooms. They wrote a long article saying that bufotenine was not psychoactive, not hallucinogenic, not psychedelic, but none of them had tried it. They really put their foot in it, and they listed a lot of literature, but several of the papers that did report that it was psychoactive and visionary, they evidently didn't read, and they were in their bibliography, but not cited in the paper. So they evidently didn't read them, so they made an embarrassing mistake. And Sasha Shulgin also in Tikal, he tested 5-methoxy DMT up to, I think, 35 milligrams orally, and he just said not orally active. But that was not a mistake. That was just a premature conclusion. It was not orally active for him at 35 milligram dose. But to say categorically not orally active was a premature conclusion, not a mistake. And so bufotenine was badly tested on prisoners and so forth by government scientists in the United States. They literally injected it intravenously in prisoners in the Ohio State Penitentiary. You do not want to. Bufotenine is dimethyl serotonin. It is the one that is most close to serotonin. It's the most active on the receptor sites in the brain, but it has trouble getting through the blood-brain barrier. So I'll just summarize the results of those experiments. It turned out that as a snuff, bufotenine, I'm talking about the pure crystals, the threshold dose is about 50 milligrams of the pure base, only the base. You do not want water-soluble salt. The shamans always add ashes. It must always be in a base form, and many of the scientists that test so-called tested snuffs, we have to make a water-soluble salt, and then it didn't work. Besides, they didn't take enough, and they didn't know what they were doing, and so it has to be base. 50 milligrams is the threshold dose of bufotenine as a snuff, and it's equal under the tongue, and you have to keep it under the tongue. I explain the methodology in the paper. So the threshold dose orally, put it into capsules so it couldn't contact any mucosa, was about double that, 100 milligrams. So bufotenine is not very active orally or as a snuff, but as inhaled vapor, it is extremely active. And when I first dried out some of the crystals I'd extracted, you put it on a little aluminum foil and vaporize it just to see, because there's a characteristic odor that comes off of these tryptamines, which is from skatol or 5-methyl-indole, which comes out of shit. And so you can smell that. But I didn't try to sniff it. I only put it 2 milligrams maybe, and just whiffing it, I could feel the effect. If I had enough to be able to smell it, I could feel the effect. So I knew it was very active. So I would say that the threshold dose as a vaporized compound is about 4 milligrams, 5 times more active than DMT as inhaled vapor, and about as active as 5-methoxy-DMT as inhaled vapor, or maybe a little stronger. It is the strongest one that way. And its effects are clearly tryptamine-like, but it is unique. I could easily distinguish bufotenine from DMT or 5-methoxy-DMT, but if I were put in an experiment where they tried to confuse me, I wouldn't be able to tell DMT and 5-methoxy-DMT apart. If the doses were adjusted and conditions were such that they were trying to confuse me. To me, they're very similar. But bufotenine is very different, but they have the same tryptamine effect in common. You all probably know the pharmacodynamics of inhaling vapor. It's very swift. You come up to the peak very quickly, and it doesn't last long, and you don't have time to overcome your surprise, and then you're going down. But if you take it orally, it lasts it's more like a mushroom trip, a little shorter. You get about a 45-minute peak. And it's like I report with pharmacology, the oral experiments with DMT plus harmine. The key point with the bufotenine experiments, which I did first, is that if you had small amounts of harmine or harmaline, but I prefer harmine because harmaline is not important in ayahuasca. It is important in the plant, but when you cook it up and so forth, it's only harmine. If you took as little as 3.7 milligrams of harmine with the snuff or sublingual. It doubled the potency. And I would also ingest 3.7 milligrams of harmine by itself and couldn't feel it at all. Harmine works against DMT, 5-methoxy, and bufotenine in the brain. It competes for the receptors, and it's a Valium-like or a Kava-like compound. It's a sedative, and it's ironic in ayahuasca that it makes it orally active, but it makes it weaker. But in the snuffs, it doubles the potency. So 5-methoxy DMT, I did the same thing. And the threshold dose for the snuff and 5-methoxy DMT was only 10 milligrams. And with this small amount of harmine, it was only 5 milligrams. And so the strongest tryptamine threshold trip that you can get with a minimal amount of material is 5 milligrams of 5-methoxy DMT with 3 or 4 milligrams of harmine. And that's even more potent than psilocybin or psilocin because the threshold doses of about 10 milligrams are a little higher. So orally, I found the oral threshold dose for me of 5-methoxy DMT was 30 milligrams, 5 milligrams lower than what Shogun had not found active. But children, I'm a low MAO type. That means you're a risk taker, you're adventurous, and maybe a loose screw also. I've never been tested for that, but I know from experiments with pharmacology, we were going to commercialize it in Holland until the chemist got busted for having a pistol, not because he was making this. And 5-methoxy DMT was legal then. We were going to sell pills of 5-methoxy DMT and harmaline because it's a little more potent as pharmacology legally. But unfortunately, that didn't happen. So with 5-methoxy DMT, I don't like the vaporized effect. The best way I would say to take it is orally. Probably 30 milligrams won't work for everybody. Maybe it would be 40 or 50 milligrams as an oral capsule. And I have done it as pharmacology as well. The best thing would be like about 30 milligrams with, say, 60 milligrams of harmine. Then make a pharmacology capsule. Then you get a very short psilocybin, or psilocin really is the effect. Psilocin like a trip, 45 minutes to come on, about a 45-minute to an hour peak, and then it comes down. Ralph Nitzler became very enthusiastic about this to use in therapy, and he found that the 5-methoxy DMT as snuff was the best thing to use in a clinical setting in group therapy, and he thought it was even more active as snuff than inhaled vapor. I thought they were about equal potent, but Ralph had more experience with more people. I was just using myself and a few other volunteers later. So in therapy, he had used it as 5 milligram dose with some. I don't think he used any beta carboline, harmine type thing. So 5 milligrams seems to be a good therapeutic dose of that. It is definitely active orally. I like it best orally, but then it takes 6 times more. I know these are hard to get and so forth. So that would be the way to use 5-methoxy DMT. Hattie has told me that some people think it's dangerous. It causes cardiac problems. I have no evidence for that whatsoever. The tryptamines are they're in the plants because they're plant hormones. They're in us because they regulate the blood pressure, and they have some neuroregulatory function of which we know nothing. People say they're neurotransmitters, but that is going beyond the evidence. There are very strict criteria to claim it as a neurotransmitter, but it is in the brain. Bufotenine, 5-methoxy DMT, and DMT. They definitely must be some kind of neuromodulator, but we really are at sea here. And people talk about theories of consciousness. We don't even know the biochemistry of storing one telephone number in the memory. And so it's reaching for the moon to make a theory of consciousness. I try to stay close to the data and build my theories on the data and not speculate very far beyond that. But I think I'm out of time. There are probably some questions. Okay. Um, I'll just summarize, and I hope I have time for questions. Um, so all of these tryptamines are, to me, the best visionary drug is LSD, bar none. I do not like ayahuasca. I lost all interest in ayahuasca when I did the snuff experiments because it's much more potent that way, and you don't have to take this gut busting. I'm sorry, but I shouldn't say this. It's politically incorrect, but I call ayahuasca jungle rot gut. It doesn't make me vomit, but some people want to vomit. I don't. And it's a really heavy dose of heavy charge in the body. I don't want the harming effect. I've taken big amounts of it. I know and all over the world, plants that contain harming are used like that, like valerian as sedatives. They're not visionary drugs. They are, I explained this yesterday. Um, but they have this one only use in this realm. They can make DMT orally active, or weeds which have small amounts of DMT orally active. Brilliant, Jonathan. Thank you very, very much.